The FTPS hosts have many options you can adjust. For the most part, this host will access over the TCP port 21. In this host, you can adjust settings in the general, uploads, limits, timeouts and transfers, security, advanced, directory list parsing, and add additional commands. The general area shares a similar fields as other hosts we have discussed, such as ID, friendly name, and description, host name, IP address, and port. Where it starts to be different is in the transfer type and mode. Transfer type allows you to determine the ASCII or the binary mode. This host setting is overwritten if set by source or destination related to the host, while the transfer mode set to active conducts manual operations of FTP. If you set it to a passive, it's used for FTP clients located behind a firewall. The username and password establishes the authentication of the credentials to access the identified FTP account on the server. Blind downloads and uploads is an option that's rarely used but is designed to accommodate unusual FTP servers. To adjust secure connection, determine the style of encryption when connecting to the FTP server. You can set explicit for just control connection or both control connection and data. If you choose implicit, it will impact both control connection and data or choose no encryption. When engaging a secure connection, you opt to ignore SSL certificate errors. Usually, this is engaged for testing. If it is not selected, MOVEit will not connect to the host if it finds a questionable certificate, and it will log it as an error. Clear text after sign-on, CCC. After connecting and signing on securely, switches to an unencrypted mode for a control connection. The field identifies the SSL client certificate used when establishing connections. Setting your upload preferences. If you choose to select No for upload as a temp file and then rename, no changes to the file name will occur. Your choice here depends on what other triggers you have set. You typically will use this field to avoid triggering another automated system that is driven by a file name, and it cannot detect the difference between open and closed or start or finished. When considering your limits area, think of file count and size download limits to be sure that the setting meets your business needs. If you exceed a limit that is set, MOVEit will automatically rerun the task. The transfer rescan time is the number of seconds that you set between the retries of a transfer, either to get or to put, before MOVEit automation stops attempting that transfer. The timeouts area lets you determine the retry count. This establishes the number of times the host will retry. By default, this is set at 0. The retry timeout establishes the time between the tries of the host attempting to connect, and this is counted in seconds. Connect timeout establishes the time to wait when attempting to connect to the host. Data timeout sets the seconds to wait when sending or receiving data. Resume portal transfers will start again if the first transfer has failed. The number of times it will attempt to transfer is set via the retry count field. The value of the retry count field in the host settings can be overwritten by the settings in a source or destination. The XSHAI command reviews a file that is received or transmitted and is compared with a copy of the file that is on the server. By comparing the SHAI hashes of the file, When you have assigned yes to reuse SSL sessions for data connections, it will force data connections to use the same SSL sessions as the existing control connection. This setting can be overridden by a source or destination setting. Typically, this is used to comply with partner server settings that requires you to use SSL sessions for data connections. Security for the host is handled by the field called Use MD5. If you have it turned on, it will look for MD5 files containing MD5 hashes of the source files on the server. The setting of Never is the default and will not look for MD5 files. If the present settings will look for special MDI files if the file contains a hash or a source file and the file is checked against the hash. It matches the hash the file contains. If it does not match, an error is generated. No hash from source file lets it continue. You can require it always to look for specific MD5 files. When the file is not found, an error is generated. If found, all downloads are checked against it. If any file does not match the hash or a match does not exist, an error is generated. Alternate host is the identification of a rollover location when the primary host is not available. Rollover will not happen if any other problems exist, such as a directory does not exist or insufficient permissions to access. It only engages when the identified host is not available. To appear in this list, the alternate host you wish to use has to have been created as a host previously. Delete state of host path. This field determines the time in days to delete the state host info. If there is a chance every time a task is run with this host that the path is different, it can cause a great deal of stored information. This excessively large retention of information can impact performance. So think hard before adjusting this out of the default. If you do not pick this option, you'll be asked to establish what the cache setting should be. The next field encountered is account for daylight savings. This adjusts execution times within the host based on the daylight savings times as it comes into effect on the host's location. Engaging ignore PASVIP in passive mode uses the IP address associated with the host configuration and ignores the IP address given by the FTP server. The default for directory list parsing is using built-in automatic parse, meaning that it will automatically recognize and parse directory listings from the most common type of FTP and SSH servers. You can apply a custom directory list parsing parameters. Most often these are used for unusual brands of FTP and SSH servers. It assumes that it contains one file per line that ignores the optional header and trailer information. Skip lines. It sets the number of lines of the header and information to be skipped at the beginning and is typically set at 0. Bottoms. The number of lines of the trailer information is to be skipped at the end of a listing. And again, this is typically 0. Start columns. File name columns, numbers where the file name stats. The first column equals 1. The file name ends at the first space or end line. The date is set at a non-zero column at which the file date stamp start. If desired, you can apply using a directory parsing script. Select desired script to apply. To use it with the script, you must be been created and imported to appear in the list. Additional commands will let you adjust communications with the host to meet different business needs. Commands to execute upon sign-on is helpful when an FTP server works when given a quote block formatting and file type commands before the transfer is performed. When you list commands, they are executed in addition to commands specified by any source or destination related to the host. If you are using AS400 FTP servers, check out the tip. Commands to execute before and after transfer allow you to kick off additional commands before a file moves or after it arrives. It is set to run at a per file level, but will run in addition to commands directed by the source and destination related to the host.